Okay, we're moving on to our next plate tectonics video, and I want to show you that we are finally going to start using this book, Lecture Tutorials, pretty much every lecture, I hope. So if you have this book, have it ready. We're going to use it in this particular case near the end of the learning video. So what is the plate in plate tectonics? What is it that Wegener didn't understand that was crucial to understanding how plates move? What Wegener thought was that the continents moved through ocean basins, like an icebreaker moving through ice. So as you can see here, the icebreaker is this boat that moves through the ice, and behind it, it leaves a big wake or a big hole in the ice, and ahead of it, it might be pushing ice upward. And there was no evidence for this, and so critics did not agree that the continents had moved. And so Wegener couldn't explain how the continents moved or why they moved. And as critics said, they just can't plow through ocean crust, which was true. That is not what they were doing. Moving on now to the more modern day theory of plate tectonics. The Earth is broken into these large rigid plates, and they contain both the continents and the ocean crust. Remember, the water on the Earth's surface is very thin, and underneath it is crust, rock. So if you look, for example, at this cartoon here, we have the South American plate, and it includes the continent of South America, but it also includes the seafloor all the way out to the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Now, this is a cartoon. We don't really have a big gaping hole out here, but the idea is Wegener didn't understand these two kinds of crust were involved in the plates. Next video, we're going to look in particular at the different kinds of plates, what they are. We're going to start naming them and thinking about how they interact. But here's a little introduction. There are 7 major plates. The largest plate is the Pacific plate. We have the North American plate, the Eurasian plate, which includes Europe and Asia, the African plate, the South American plate, the Australian Indian plate, which in this particular map is unfortunately split into 2, and then the Antarctic plate, which you can't really see very well on this map, but it encompasses all of the southern continent of Antarctica. We then have 7 intermediate-sized plates, and those are shown here with green stars. Again, we'll look at these in more detail later. Take a moment, see if you can label the major layers of Earth on a diagram like this. Okay, so we live on the crust. The crust is so thin on the scale of this diagram that I'm just going to leave it this dark line. That's all it's going to be. The next layer down is the mantle. Under the mantle we have the core, and the core is divided into the outer core and the inner core. We're going to talk a lot about these layers in the next several weeks. It's important to know which ones are solid and which ones are liquid for a number of reasons. So the crust that we live on is solid rock, and the mantle is also solid. The outer core is liquid, and if you remember, it's the electrons moving in that outer core that creates our magnetic field. And then the inner core is solid. So let's take a closer look at the crust. As I've mentioned, there's 2 kinds of crustal rocks. There's continental crust, which is depicted in this cartoon as mountains or islands above sea level. And then there's ocean crust, which we don't really see because it's covered with ocean water. It's low. Now I know you can't draw this cartoon, this figure here. It's not necessary. At this point, we're just going to give you some definitions. The continental crust is thicker, but it's lower in density. The ocean crust is thinner, but higher in density. And those density differences are because of the type of rocks they're made of. So what this means is that if we looked at a picture in cross-section, the continental crust, which is thicker, kind of floats a little higher on the underlying material. And the ocean crust, which is shown here, is thinner, but floats lower. So the ocean water tends to be on top of the ocean crust. Okay, so now we're going to draw, and you might want to get out some colored pencils or pens because we're going to draw quite a few things. So I want you to start with just a line that looks like this. It's going to be a cross section, and a second line like this. And we're going to label ocean crust and continental crust. So this again is a cross section through the Earth. We're looking at a side view. And just to emphasize, here's some ocean water and a little fish, or maybe a big whale, I'm not sure. So this is the crust. And what's below the crust that we just drew? The mantle. But we're going to start to separate the mantle now into different parts. And we're going to start with a layer closest to the top of the mantle called the uppermost mantle. And it's about 100 kilometers from Earth's surface to the base of this particular layer. So the crust has a characteristic of being brittle. And what that means is it can break. Just like if you drop a dinner plate and it shatters, it breaks, it's brittle. And that's what happens when we have earthquakes. Faults occur and rocks break. And the uppermost mantle is also brittle. So these two layers together are actually called the lithosphere. Litho means rock. And so together, these parts of the upper part of the Earth are the plate in plate tectonics. The asthenosphere, which goes down to about 660 kilometers from the surface, is the next part of the mantle under the uppermost mantle. And this is not brittle. This area is ductile. It's still a solid, like I said earlier, but it flows. It's capable of flow. And in fact, we have mantle convection down in this area. And it's believed that this mantle convection might actually push the overlying lithospheric plates around. So this is something that Wegener didn't understand. He didn't realize that ocean crust and continental crust might merge together and move together as one giant plate. So the lithospheric plates float essentially on the asthenosphere, and that's what's shown in this diagram. Again, I've just reproduced it. We've got the lithosphere here represented by crust in the light color for continental crust, this gray color for ocean crust, and then this speckled looking brown is the uppermost mantle. And that is the plate. Now we have some other things going on that we're going to get to in our next video. The lithosphere is the plate in plate tectonics, and the asthenosphere is the underlying weak ductile layer in the upper mantle. Some of the plates on Earth are completely oceanic. So, for example, the Pacific plate is all ocean. Other plates have both ocean and continental crust in them, or ocean and continental lithosphere if you want. So here's the Indian-Australian plate. We've got the continent of Australia. We've got India. And then we've got lots of ocean crust as well. So there's quite a variation in types of plates. But the key is Wegener didn't realize that the plates were more than just what we see as the continents. Okay, so now I'd like you to turn to pages 33 and 34 in your lecture tutorial. I want you to pause this video and I want you to see if you can answer the questions. And then I'm going to give you the answers. Okay, here come the answers. So number 1, in the diagram, draw a circle to the left of the layers that have the same composition. And so we have a layer of rock, and then a layer of iron-rich rock, and then another layer of iron-rich rock. So the top layer doesn't really say what kind of rock, but it's different than the lower two layers. So those are the correct ones to put a circle next to. The next question says draw a square to the right of layers that have the same behavior under stress. And that would be the top two, because they both break under stress. They are the brittle ones that I talked about. The lower one bends under stress. It's ductile. Number 3, label the two composition layers, crust and mantle, on the left side of the diagram with brackets. So the crust is that uppermost layer that's a rock, not an iron-rich rock. And the mantle includes both of the iron-rich rock layers. Number 4, label the two behavior layers, in other words, the lithosphere and the asthenosphere. So the lithosphere includes the layers that break under stress, that are brittle. And the asthenosphere is the one that's ductile. So look at this picture and notice that crust does not equal lithosphere and mantle does not equal asthenosphere. This is a little tricky, okay? Lithosphere is crust plus uppermost mantle. And so number 5 says a tectonic plate is made up of the lithosphere, circle the layers. So crust and upper mantle is the lithosphere. I don't know why they add the word lithosphere in here. I think it's kind of redundant. Okay, number 6. What's an important characteristic to determine what makes up the tectonic plate versus what makes up the layer beneath it? And the key here is, does it break or does it bend? That is what is telling us whether it's lithosphere or asthenosphere. Is lithosphere just a more scientific name for the crust? No. Lithosphere includes the crust and the rigid part of the uppermost mantle. They're not the same thing. The lithosphere includes the crust. Next page. It says fill the key using the terms rock, iron-rich rock, breaks under stress, or bends under stress. So for these top two compositional patterns, we have iron-rich rock, which is most of what's shown here as the Earth, and then not iron-rich rock, which is at the surface. In terms of behavior, the shaded area breaks under stress near the surface, and then the white-colored region bends under stress. 9 says label the crust, upper mantle, lithosphere, and asthenosphere. So the crust and upper mantle, again, are compositionally different. The crust is this polka dot area that's on the very top, and the upper mantle is the part that has the pattern with little stripes, the iron-rich rock. When it comes to the lithosphere and asthenosphere, now we're looking at behavior differences. And I've shaded yellow the lithosphere that breaks under stress, and then the rest of the area here that's in white is the asthenosphere. It bends under stress. Here are two students trying to decide what they think the crust is, and student 1 is correct. The crust is at Earth's surface, and we walk on top of it. Sometimes it's broken up into sediment, such as sand at the beach, but we're still on Earth's crust. And then the last one, you don't have to dig to get to a tectonic plate. We live directly on tectonic plates. Coming up next, the 3 types of plate boundaries.